Did you know that there were spies in our fight for independence? That's right. But would you guess that I am one of them? But I'm not the typical kind of spy you would expect. I don't sneak around in dark corners and hide letters in the hems of my skirt. My intelligence was sent to my husband, John Adams, in our love letters. When I was a young girl, I yearned to go to college. But alas, college was for young men. But my father felt I deserved more. So as a pastor, he educated me. And I learned Latin and philosophy and my favorite, Shakespeare. As a young girl, he had many visitors, and when I was 15, a lawyer would come to our home. His name was John. Now, he was 9 years my senior, so being 24 years old, you can imagine my mother was not thrilled when he continued to call on me. But John and I had the most wonderful conversations. We would talk about liberty and freedom and philosophy and history, and we would read Shakespeare together every day. He called me his Diana, and I would call him Lysander from our favorite play, A Midsummer's Night Dream. And when I was 19 years old, even though my mother had objected, I was able to marry my beloved John. We settled in a farm on Penn Hill, just on the outskirts of Boston. And then in 1775, that fateful spring, we had the battles of Lexington and Concord. And it set a separation between John and myself. He was sent to Philadelphia, where he would be in the Continental Congress to decide the fate of the colonies. And I was to stay home on the farm and tend the children. Like many wives, this was difficult, but especially for me, I yearned to be in Philadelphia. I wanted to be there with the debates and have my voice heard, for I was just as educated as any of the men, but I knew my place was at home with my children and to support my beloved John. One day, I was watching the children and I heard cannon fire over the harbor. So I rushed to the window and I picked up my spyglass and I looked out and I saw a British warship. There was smoke. There were soldiers. And I knew I needed to write this information to John. And then I realized I could play an important part in the fight for independence. Maybe not with a musket, maybe not in Philadelphia, but with my paper and my pen. So every day I would go to the window with my spyglass and I would track the movements of the British ships. And I could tell you what every ship was, how many men were on the ship, what type of ship, what the cargo was, where the soldiers were getting off, where they were moving. And John told me that my correspondence was clearer and fuller than any he ever received from the commissions of Congress. I was doing something valuable. But there were days when we yearned for independence because the battle raged so fiercely. We could hear the cannon fire in our little home and the windows would tremble. Such a day, I took my little John Quincy by the hand and we walked to the top of Penn Hill and we saw across to Bunker Hill. The fierce battle was raging. The cannon fire was so loud, little Quincy would hide in my skirt. And I wondered, why would I take my sweet boy to the top of this hill when he was so frightened he couldn't even look? But I knew he must see for himself the price of freedom, that we had to make sacrifices, and 450 young patriots lost their lives that day on Bunker Hill. The yearning for independence grew even stronger, for you see, this was at the beginning. We had not declared independence. We were still British colonists. So I wrote to John and I yearned for him to give me news that they were going to declare independence. And as a side note, to maybe make sure that they treated the women better than they did in past generations. It was just a few months later when the Declaration of Independence was signed, and we were thrilled. Now, I have to admit, when John came to visit, I teased him a little that I didn't think maybe women were treated quite as well as I had hoped. But I also knew that there was a promise in that document that we are all created equal, and that to fulfill that promise, we had to do things every day in our own lives. John and I were abolitionists. We did not believe in slavery. One day, a young Negro boy came to my home asking to be taught to read and write. My neighbor, did not like this. He confronted me on the issue, and I said to him, this young man is as free as any young man. Merely because his face is black does not mean he does not deserve instruction. He must learn to read and write so he can work, and I find no disgrace in bringing him into my parlor to teach him to read and to write. And I did just that. You see, liberty is about opportunity for all. When the war finally ended and peace came, John was sent to Europe. Our long separation was finally coming to a close, though, as I sailed on one of those ships off to Europe to join him as he was the ambassador to France and England. But the most exciting thing is that standing before you today, if you would believe it, the young girl who wanted to go to college and spied through her window is the first lady to the second president of the United States. We all play a part. We all make a difference. That is the story I want to share with you today.